The fourth section of Twilight of the Idols is titled Reason in Philosophy. It consists of 6 numbered sections, is about 5 pages long, and the sneer quotes around reason are in the original. In section 1, Nietzsche addresses the relationship between prior philosophers and history. We should think of history here as the unfolding and flux of changing events in this world. Plato and other philosophers, Nietzsche says, dehistoricize reality. They take real things and mummify them. They turn bits of reality into concepts. In this way, they are like the Egyptian mummy makers. They take something real and alive and vital, and they drain all the blood out of it, wrap it up in bandages, turn it into a mummy, and then treat it as though the mummy is the real thing, and the living thing were only a shadow or imperfect form of it. The context for this conflict between Plato, especially, and Nietzsche is the contrast between being and becoming, the problem of being and becoming, which Plato solves by positing a realm of perfect ideas or forms outside of this world of changing appearances. Nietzsche is interested here in vindicating the side of becoming as being more important than, more fundamental than, being. These mummy philosophers, he says, are the enemies of the senses, of the body, and of history. In fact, they're the enemies of life, as we'll see later. In section 2, Nietzsche makes one exception among the ancients for Heraclitus, whom, if you've read the Pre-Socratics, you remember extols flux and becoming at the expense of being. He says the senses do not lie. It's our interpretations of them that introduce lies. And an important quote from this section, the apparent world is the only world. The true world is merely added by a lie. That is, it's Plato who posits the perfect realm of ideas and forms, who is the liar. The apparent world, in fact, does not need this kind of philosophical explanation. I'll pause here before going on to the next section to note that we're getting a picture here of the two sides in the war that Nietzsche announced in the preface, and I'm going to simply nominate Plato as the representative of the opposed side, as representing being, the forms or ideas, perfection, reality as an ideal reality, stability, concepts, and unity. Nietzsche, on the other hand, on his side, is pushing the reality of becoming, of appearance, change, and growth, of the body and its senses, and the value of multiplicity rather than unity. In section 3, Nietzsche praises the senses for their great subtlety in grasping the world around us, and he notes that science today depends upon our accepting the testimony of the senses. Everything else that is not science, especially philosophy and metaphysics, he calls a miscarriage and not yet science. It is misleading us by claiming to give us the truth, but not trusting the senses to do so. In section 4, Nietzsche notes that philosophers, prior philosophers, in the tradition of Plato, confused the last with the first. They begin their thought with concepts rather than ending with concepts. And they tend to think that anything high must be changeless and causeless. Then he says this is the origin of their idea of God. In section 5, Nietzsche begins to sketch out his view of change and appearance. He says previously change was seen as a sign of mere appearance and therefore of error and unreality. If a thing was changing, according to Plato, that meant that it could not be fully real. Now, Nietzsche says, our rational compulsion to find unity and permanence, that is, our debt to Platonic philosophy, leads us into error. He compares this to the motion of the sun across the sky. If we trust our eye, it misleads us into thinking that the sun is moving when we know upon reflection that this is not the case. Here he says it is our language that misleads us into thinking that we have contact with a higher world. At the end of this section, a very important quote, Nietzsche says, "We are not rid of God because we still have faith in grammar." In section 6, Nietzsche sums up his insights here in 4 theses. I'm going to express them using Plato as a stand-in for the earlier tradition of philosophy that Nietzsche is at war with. Thesis 1. Plato cited certain facts, like change and becoming, as proof of this world's unreality. In fact, they are proof of its reality, says Nietzsche. Thesis 2. Plato's criteria for being, such as permanence and perfection, are in fact criteria for nothingness. His true world is an illusion and a contradiction of the apparent world. Thesis 3. Belief in a higher world is a slander against life and a sign of weak will to power. Thesis 4. The distinction between a true world and an apparent world is itself a sign of decadence and decline. The healthy thing to do would be to make no such distinction. This brings us to the end of the 4th section of Twilight of the Idols. We'll look at the 5th section next. Goodbye.